Here's a number to sit with for a second. The average person carrying credit card debt owes about $6,700. Not on the mortgage, not on the car, just on the credit card. But the balance is only part of the problem. 29% of Americans have more credit card debt than they have in emergency savings. And if a $1,000 emergency happened tomorrow, 59% of Americans would not be able to cover it from savings, which means millions of people are not simply carrying debt. They are one flat tire, one medical bill, or one unexpected expense away from adding even more. But knowing how your balance compares with everyone else is only the beginning. Today, we are going category by category: credit cards, student loans, auto loans, mortgages, and the smaller debts people often forget to count, so you can see exactly how your debt compares with the average Americans. Then, by the end, I will show you why being below average does not automatically mean you are doing well, and how to tell whether your own debt is actually a problem. Let's begin with the category that can become dangerous the fastest: credit card debt. Category 1, credit card debt. The average credit card balance in America right now is $6,715. That's the average among people who actually carry a balance month to month, not everyone who owns a card. Nationally, all of those balances added up to a record $1.28 trillion in outstanding credit card debt at the end of 2025, the highest amount ever recorded. Nearly half of cardholders carried a balance for at least 1 month this past year. So here's exactly where you land. If you don't carry a balance at all, you're already below that $6,715 average. No comparison needed. If you do carry one, here's where it actually gets measured and where it gets serious. That split isn't permanent, and it's worth being honest about why. Most people carrying a balance right now didn't plan to. One irregular month, one emergency, one stretch where the paycheck came up short, and you go from carrying no balance at all to carrying one. That's the line that actually matters, not whether the balance you end up with is big or small. So here's what's actually waiting on the other side of it. The average interest rate on credit card debt that's actually accruing interest is just over 22%. That number does more damage than the balance itself, and it does that damage faster than most people realize. Let's start with just 1 year. Take that average balance and imagine only paying the minimum every month, which is usually 1% of the balance plus that month's interest. After 12 months of doing exactly that, about $1,400 has gone to interest, and only around $760 has actually come off the balance after a full year of payments. That $6,700 balance has barely moved. Now, stretch that out. Keep making only the minimum at that same rate, and the balance takes almost 19 years to fully disappear. Total cost by the time it's gone, almost $11,000 in interest alone. That's more than the original balance on a card that started at under $7,000. The minimum payment isn't designed to get you out of debt. It's designed to keep the account open and current for the bank. And to be clear, the problem here isn't using a credit card. Groceries, gas, travel points, all of that is fine. The issue is the balance that gets left behind every month. That leftover balance is rarely random. It's usually a signal. Spending more than the paycheck allows, using credit as the emergency fund that was never built, or a lifestyle that quietly outgrew the income holding it up. Here's exactly why that gap matters so much. 59% of Americans right now could not cover a $1,000 emergency from savings. That's not a rare situation or an edge case. That's more than half the country, one car repair or one urgent vet bill away from reaching for a card, charging over 20% interest instead. An emergency fund isn't sitting off to the side of this problem. It is the actual thing standing between you and becoming part of the math we just walked through. It doesn't need to start at 3 to 6 months of expenses to matter either, even $500. Sitting untouched is often enough to absorb the kind of surprise that currently sends most people straight to a credit card instead. Worth knowing, too, this isn't spread evenly across the country. Generation X carries the highest average credit card balance of any generation, over $9,000, nearly 3 times what Gen Z carries. Peak earning years often mean peak spending years too, and the balance shows it. So the real question was never, do you have a credit card? It's whether that card is covering a gap that should have been covered by savings instead. Here's something to hold on to for later. If your balance is below the national average, that might feel like a win right now. I'll come back to why that's not necessarily true a little further into this video. Let's move to category 2, student loan debt. On paper, this is supposed to be the good debt. Total student loan debt in America now sits at around $1.85 trillion, according to Education Data Initiative figures. The average combined balance, counting both federal and private loans, is around $43,500. But here's a detail almost nobody mentions. The median is only about $24,000. That gap tells you something. A relatively small number of borrowers, mostly graduate and professional degree holders, are pulling that average way up. If your balance sits closer to the median, you're actually closer to typical than the headline number suggests. Student loans get treated differently than credit cards because education is supposed to increase what you can earn, and sometimes it does. But being valuable doesn't automatically mean every dollar borrowed for it was a good decision. The real question is not whether this is good debt. The real questions are, what did the qualification cost? What does it actually pay? And does the second number justify the first? A nursing degree that costs $30,000 and leads to a stable $70,000 salary is a very different bet than a degree in a saturated field that costs the same $30,000 and leads to a starting salary under $40,000. Same debt, completely different outcome. Here's what that looks like stretched out over time using the current federal undergraduate interest rate, which sits at about 6.5%, according to the Department of Education. On a standard 10-year repayment plan, that $43,500 balance works out to about $495 a month and around $59,000 paid in total, with roughly $16,000 of that being interest. Switch to an extended 20-year plan, the kind many income-driven repayment options stretch toward, and the monthly payment drops to around $325. But the total pay climbs to almost $78,000, with more than $34,000 of that being interest. Same balance, same rate. The only thing that changed is how long the loan was stretched out, and that one choice is worth over $18,000. Some borrowers end up on plans even longer than that and still watch the balance barely move or even grow because of how interest and repayment structure interact over time. That's not a failure of discipline. That's the math of the loan working exactly as designed, just not in the borrower's favor. And student debt has a cost that never shows up on the statement: delaying retirement contributions, delaying a first home, delaying starting a family, and delaying the emergency fund that should have been built years earlier. Every year that debt sits there untouched is a year those other moves get pushed back. One thing worth flagging before we move on: not every student loan needs to be attacked first, and this is actually the right moment to define something we'll keep coming back to for the rest of this video: the difference between high interest and low interest debt. Think back to that 22% credit card from a minute ago. That is high interest debt. Anything roughly in the double digits earns urgency, the kind that gets attacked with every spare dollar you have. Student loans sitting around 6.5% fall into the lower interest category, close to what you could reasonably expect to earn investing that same money instead. Low interest debt earns a plan, not panic, and it can often sit alongside other financial goals without a problem. So if your rate is low and your employer offers a retirement match, chasing an aggressive payoff on cheap student debt while ignoring free retirement money is its own mistake. And if you're still deciding how much to borrow in the first place, here's a boundary worth holding on to. Try not to take on more total student debt than you realistically expect to earn in your first year out of school. It's not a perfect rule, but it keeps the size of the loan tied to the size of the paycheck it's supposed to lead to, instead of just the sticker price of the degree. Category 3 is next: auto loan debt. The average auto loan balance right now sits around $24,500, and total outstanding auto loan debt across the country has climbed to a record $1.69 trillion. The more revealing number, though, is the monthly payment. For a new vehicle, the average payment has hit an all-time high of $777 a month, the third consecutive quarterly record. For a used vehicle, it's $531. Here's the math most people never actually run. Take that new car average, $44,156 borrowed, over an average term of just over 70 months. Multiply the payment out across the full term, and the total paid comes to about $54,700. That's over $10,000 in financing costs, on top of a vehicle that's worth less the day you drive it off the lot than the day before. Annualize that $777 payment, and it's over $9,300 a year. Keep that payment running for 10 years, and you've moved $93,000 through a depreciating asset. That's not a car payment anymore. That's a second rent. This one also skews by generation, the same way credit cards do. Gen X and millennials carry the highest average auto balances, largely because bigger families need bigger, more expensive vehicles at exactly the point in life when a mortgage and other bills are already stacking up. Dealerships center the conversation around one question: what monthly payment can you afford? Not what does this vehicle actually cost? Stretch the loan long enough and almost any price feels affordable because the pain gets spread so thin that you stop noticing it. Nearly 1 in 5 new vehicle loans right now comes with a monthly payment of $1,000 or more, and most of those aren't luxury cars. They're pickup trucks and SUVs, financed by buyers who never sat down and worked out what the total actually adds up to. And that's not even counting the loan length itself. Nearly 1 in 4 new vehicle buyers are now financing for 84 months or longer, 7 full years, a record on its own. Stretching the term is exactly how that $1,000 payment gets hidden in the first place. There's also a trap layered inside this category. Some borrowers trade in a car before it's paid off and roll the leftover balance into the next loan. Say someone owes $8,000 on a car that's only worth $5,000 at trade-in time. That $3,000 gap doesn't disappear. It gets folded into the new loan, buried inside a bigger number that now feels like one payment instead of 2 mistakes. So if you're financing a car, here's what actually keeps this category safe. Put real money down up front so you're not underwater the moment you drive off the lot. Keep the term short enough that you're not still paying for a car you're already tired of. Once it's paid off, keep driving it. Those debt-free years are where a car actually starts saving you money instead of costing you. And hold off on financing anything in the luxury tier until the rest of your financial foundation is already solid. Savings, retirement investing, and no high interest debt. None of this means nobody should ever finance a car. It means the payment and the purchase price are 2 different questions, and being able to afford one doesn't mean you can afford the other. That brings us to category 4, mortgage debt, the largest number most people will ever owe. The average mortgage balance in America is $264,162. Nationally, mortgage debt adds up to over $13 trillion spread across nearly 87 million mortgage accounts. The median home price recently crossed $398,000. Let's actually run the numbers on that average balance. At a current typical rate, the monthly payment on principal and interest alone comes to around $1,650. Stretch that across a full 30-year term, and the total pay comes to almost $595,000. That's more than double the amount borrowed, with over $330,000 of that being interest. Here's the actual rule worth keeping in your head, regardless of what your specific balance is. Try to keep your total monthly housing costs under 28% of your gross income. On that average payment, that means a household would need to be earning around $71,000 a year to stay under it. Below that line, a bad month is uncomfortable. Above it, a bad month is often where real trouble starts. Mortgage debt gets treated as the responsible kind, and there's a reason for that. It's attached to something that can go up in value, and it's usually the lowest interest rate most people will ever carry. But different doesn't mean automatically safe. Here's the trap this category hides best: being house rich and cash poor. Picture the family with a beautifully renovated kitchen and a driveway that needs $4,000 of repair work they can't currently afford. Or the homeowner with genuine equity on paper who couldn't cover a broken furnace in January without reaching for a credit card. The house is worth more every year. The bank account isn't. The number that actually matters here isn't the balance. It's the percentage of income the mortgage consumes every month and what's left over once it's paid. A family earning well above average with a large mortgage can be completely secure. A family earning modestly with a smaller mortgage can be one bad month away from disaster. The balance alone doesn't tell you which one you're looking at. There's also a quieter mistake worth naming: upgrading homes before real equity is built. Each move resets the clock and adds new closing costs, new taxes, new insurance, and new maintenance. A first home with a small down payment makes sense for most buyers starting out. Repeating that pattern every few years does not. And paying off a mortgage early sounds responsible on its surface, but the full picture has more nuance than that. If the rate is low and there's no emergency fund yet, no retirement investing happening, and no employer match being captured, throwing every spare dollar at a cheap mortgage before those other pieces exist means optimizing the wrong line item first. One more version of this is worth naming. A mortgage payment that felt completely manageable during your highest earning years can turn into real pressure once retirement income replaces a paycheck. A required monthly payment doesn't shrink just because the income funding it does. That's worth thinking about years before it actually happens, not the year it does. Last category, category 5, the debt that doesn't make the list. This one covers 4 different types, so let's go through them one at a time. The first type is personal loans. The average balance right now is around $19,300, and more than a third of American consumers now carry one. People use them for all kinds of things: consolidating higher interest credit card debt, covering an emergency, paying for a wedding or a big trip, funding home improvements, or just covering ordinary living expenses that didn't fit in the budget that month. Consolidation specifically can genuinely help, but only if you close or freeze the credit cards you just paid off. Without that one step, the old balance quietly rebuilds right alongside the new loan payment, and now there are 2 debts instead of one. The second type is buy now, pay later. This one's different because it isn't built to leave a balance the way a loan does, which is exactly what makes it slippery. According to one industry survey, close to half of users have paid one of these late in the past year, and most people using them are juggling 3 or more at once. Imagine 4 separate plans landing in the same week: one for a couch, one for concert tickets, one for a phone bundle, and one for a last minute flight. None of them look like debt individually. All 4 hitting the same paycheck at once is a different story entirely. The fix here isn't complicated. It is just something almost nobody actually does. Know the total number of payments you're committed to across every app at once before you add a new one, not after. The third type is medical debt, and it's different again because it rarely starts with a decision at all. Over 40% of American adults are currently carrying some form of medical or dental debt. The typical amount owed sits around $2,000, but that number can explode overnight after one hospitalization or one uncovered procedure. This isn't a spending problem, it's an exposure problem, and it deserves less judgment and more of a plan. Payment arrangements, negotiating the bill directly, checking whether the provider offers financial assistance or charity care, and keeping it off a high interest credit card whenever possible. The fourth type is payday loans, and this is the one that gets the least attention because the people caught in it have the least room to talk about it. The average borrower spends about 5 months of the year in some form of payday debt, and most aren't using it for a surprise emergency. They're using it to cover rent, utilities, or groceries the paycheck already couldn't stretch to. Most don't have the full amount ready by the due date, so they roll the loan forward, sometimes the same day, and the fees start compounding on top of fees. If you ever find yourself here, credit unions increasingly offer small dollar emergency loans built specifically to interrupt this cycle instead of feeding it, usually at a fraction of the cost. Most people are never told that this option exists. It is worth asking about before the loan rolls over again. None of these four show up when someone tallies their real debt. A person can look at their credit card, their car, maybe their mortgage, and think they know their full picture. Meanwhile, there's a personal loan payment, two buy now, pay later installments, and a medical bill on a payment plan, all quietly pulling from the same paycheck as everything else. Small doesn't mean harmless, it just means invisible until you add it up. Let's put those 5 categories together now and answer the question this video is actually built around. How much debt does the average American carry once everything is counted? Here's something important before I give you that number. You can't get there by simply adding up every average I just gave you. That would be a mistake, and it's a mistake almost everyone makes without realizing it. The credit card average only describes people who carry a credit card balance. The student loan average only describes people who have student loans. The mortgage average only describes people who currently have a mortgage. Add all of those together, and you've built a fictional person who has every single type of debt at once at the average amount, which almost nobody actually is. The real number has to come from a different kind of calculation, one that looks at actual total debt per person across the population, not an imaginary composite. According to Experian's own consumer debt data, the average American carries about $105,000 in total debt. Quick clarification before we go further, because this number gets confused with a different one all the time. This is personal household level debt, mortgages, credit cards, loans, all of it, owed by individuals. It's not the same as the national debt you hear about in the news, which is the federal government's own borrowing, currently sitting above $39 trillion total. Different number, tracking a completely different thing, owed by a completely different borrower. That $105,000 figure includes the mortgage, which is why it's so large. Strip the mortgage out, and the average non-mortgage debt drops to just over $21,000. That's the number that's actually more useful day to day, since it's the debt most tied to monthly cash flow rather than a long-term asset. So take a second and place yourself against that $105,000 number. Below it, above it, right around it. Hold on to your answer because the next part changes what that answer actually means. Earlier, I asked you to hold on to something, whether a below average credit card balance really felt like a win. Here's why that matters now. Comparing your debt to the average American is one of the least reliable ways to measure how you're actually doing. And I want to walk you through 4 different situations to show you exactly why. Situation 1, someone with credit card debt well below the national average. Sounds good on paper, but if they're paying close to 30% interest, making only the minimum, unable to save a dollar, and using that card to cover groceries most weeks, that person is below average and still in real danger. Situation 2, someone with a mortgage well above the national average. On paper, that sounds alarming, but if they have a stable income, months of expenses saved, a low fixed rate, real equity buildup, and consistent retirement contributions every month, that person is above average and completely secure. Situation 3, someone with zero debt of any kind. No credit card balance, no car payment, no mortgage. That sounds like the healthiest position on this entire list. But if that same person has no savings, no retirement account, no insurance, and no income stability, being debt-free hasn't protected them from anything. It just means the crisis, when it comes, starts from zero instead of from a balance. Situation 4, someone with a large mortgage, a car payment, maybe even some credit card debt, but also real equity in a home, consistent investments, and a net worth quietly climbing every year. On the surface, that looks like the most indebted person in the room. It might actually be the most financially secure one. So here's the question to bring back to yourself. Not any of these 4 people. Which of these four situations actually sounds like you? That's a more useful question than whether your number sits above or below anyone else's, because the average American is useful for context and dangerous as a target. It tells you where the middle of the country sits. It tells you nothing about whether you personally are safe. So if comparing yourself to the average isn't the right tool, what is? Here's the framework I actually use, and it has 7 questions. I'll go through them one at a time. First, what is the interest rate? Remember the high interest versus low interest line from earlier. Double digits versus something closer to what you might earn by investing. That distinction is what decides whether this debt earns urgency or a plan. Second, what percentage of your income does the required payment consume? A moderate balance can still be dangerous if the payment eats too much of every paycheck, leaving nothing for savings, insurance, or the unexpected. Third, is the balance actually shrinking? Regular payments should produce visible progress month over month. A balance that stays flat or grows isn't a coincidence. It's a warning that something in the structure of the debt is working against you. Fourth, what did the debt buy? Education, a home, reliable transportation, and a business asset aren't the same as debt that quietly covered ordinary living expenses. That doesn't make the debt good or bad by itself, but it tells you what value, if any, is left behind it. Fifth, what is this debt preventing you from doing right now? Building an emergency fund, investing for retirement, leaving a job that isn't working, or starting a family. Every debt has an opportunity cost, and that cost is often bigger than the interest rate printed on the statement. 6, could you keep paying this if your income disappeared for 1 month? Manageable debt shouldn't turn into a crisis after a single missed paycheck. If it would, that's the debt to address first, regardless of its size relative to anyone else's. And 7th, is your net worth actually improving? Not your income, not your lifestyle. Everything you own minus everything you owe. That number, tracked over time, tells you more about your financial health than any debt category or any comparison to anyone else ever will. So here's where all of this actually lands. The average American carries about $6,700 in credit card debt and about $105,000 in debt altogether once everything is counted. You now know exactly where you stand next to every piece of that, but being below average never proved you were doing well. Being above average never proved you were failing. That comparison works both directions, and it works quietly because it feels like information when it's actually just noise. Don't use someone else's higher debt as permission to keep yours. Don't use someone else's lower debt as proof that you failed. The real goal was never to beat the average American. It's to make sure your balances are shrinking, your assets are growing, and your monthly payments have stopped controlling your life.